Now please enjoy 10 true disturbing Tinder horror stories. Please also comment where you are watching in the world. If I had known she was wanting to end her life, I would have tried to get help, but I refused to accept any blame for decisions that I did not make. One night in high school, I went to a pool party about 20 minutes away. Probably like 80 to 90 people from a lot of different schools were there. I stood around talking to some guys I recognized from water polo. We told random stories about games, complained about refs, and laughed about stuff that always happens at practice. I was having a good time. Then a girl came by, put her arm on my shoulder, and said, "Hey tough guy, what's your name?" In my 23 years, it's happened very few times that a girl at a party has come up to me and wanted to talk, and that was one of them, so I was excited. She pulled me away from the squad, and we introduced ourselves. I thought she had the hots for me, but she took me over to someone else who was standing alone, and said, "I want you to meet my friend Sophia," not her real name. The first girl left really soon after that, implying that Sophia and I should hang out with each other. Sophia went to school in the opposite direction, about half an hour away from me. We chatted for a minute or two, but I wasn't interested and I wanted to go back to the water polo squad. I thought it would be rude to leave Sophia by herself, so I asked her if she wanted to talk to the squad. She said no. I said it was nice meeting her and that I was going back. Sophia stopped me on my way out and asked for my number. I said, "No, but it was nice meeting you." The next Thursday, I got a text that said, "Hey, this is Sophia. Christina introduced us at the party last week. You seem like a cool guy. How about we see a movie tomorrow night and get dinner?" She had found my number somehow and wasn't afraid to use it. I responded, "No thanks. I'm not interested." I got similar messages each week, along with memes and random texts/jokes. I gave her the same response twice, then I stopped responding, and finally I blocked her after about 4 weeks of giving her the shoulder. One day, someone told me they heard that a girl named Sophia, last name, at another school had killed herself over being rejected by me. I googled her name, and some local news stations had reported on the suicide. I looked up her name on Facebook and saw she was tagged in so many posts mourning the loss. I have no idea how, but people had somehow heard it was over a rejection, which was being referenced in a lot of those posts. Thank God no one called me out by name. I wasn't anonymous either. I started getting really angry messages, calls, and even voicemails from people I didn't know saying how it was all my fault, that I should have given her a chance, and that an innocent young girl is dead over my thoughtlessness. I had to deactivate my Facebook and change my number since I was getting so many angry messages. Thank God people who knew her lived so far away. Otherwise they might have shown up at my front door too. I feel terrible that Sophia ended her life. Anyone's suicide is really sad. I wish Sophia would have gotten help and moved on with her life. That said, no one should ever be pressured into taking someone out on a date, and I will never apologize for saying no to her. So we were going to meet after I returned from visiting family out of state for the holidays, but decided to meet up the other day. We were going to go out to an event and eat there, but due to scheduling he suggested that we order takeout and eat at my place, then go to the event later. I was like, that's not a good idea. 1. I live in a very, very small apartment. It's meant for one, and to save space I only have a bed, computer table/dining table, computer chair to sit on. It's not made for guests, and I definitely did not want him on my bed for fear that things would progress in a direction I didn't want and I'd have to kick him out. 2. I was not prepared to have people over, and it was not cleaned in a way I'd like. We discussed this during dinner again as well, and my answer is still the same, no. He asks if I want to come over his house, still no. So we go to the event, eat, then we to my place so he can drop me off. We sit in the car for a little bit, and of course he want to make out. I'll try to take the lead, but he just right goes for tongue shoving. I keep trying to start off with closed lips, but every time I go in his mouth is always open, and it's just straight up tongue, face swallowing, tongue, over and over again. He made a comments about how I was doing duck lips, and in my head I'm just thinking it's because I tired of you licking my face and doing giant open mouth kisses. He kept holding my head, so sometimes I couldn't even back off or tilt my head. I don't understand, it was so much worse that before. At one point he asks how my sexual health is, and then explains he's healthy and has been tested. I stare at him blankly for a moment, because what does that have to do with us? He already licked my face, so if either of us had HSV-1 or 2 it's too late for this conversation. Plus, we're not having sex of any kind. This too had been discussed at length. Then he says something else even more out of place. Something like, I have something I've been holding in that I need to release. I stare blankly again, then ask him to clarify, because it sounds like some sexual innuendo. Nope, apparently he has to pee, but can't ask like a normal person. Ugh. I hesitate because my gut reaction is that it's just a ploy to get into my apartment. I should have listened to my gut, but I didn't feel comfortable telling him no, or to use the gas station a couple of blocks away. We go to my apartment. Now I've already discussed twice why I don't want to hang out in my apartment. He goes to the bathroom, and I'm hanging out, standing up because I'm basically waiting to escort him out and tell him goodnight. He comes out and gets chatty, asks for a tour. Then he asks for a drink. Starts trying to make out and comments how it's better than the car. Why don't we sit down? I'm like, no, not sitting on my bed, so I get back up. In his mind, I guess no bed sitting means let's go on the floor. I have tile, y'all. It's not comfortable to sit or lay unless you're laying on something. He slides down on the floor and pulls me down to join him. More awkward kissing, and I happen to open my eyes to see his mouth wide open and his tongue out. I close my eyes back. I keep pulling back because he keeps licking my face. I'm still wearing what I wore out, tight jeggings/skinny jeans. He suggests why don't I get into something more comfortable, but I tell him nope, otherwise I'd be going to bed, and he wouldn't be here. Then I experience something weird. When I pull my face back the last 2 times, he just looked different to me. Like it wasn't his normal, friendly face, like he looked different, and it scared me. It was subtle, but I don't know. I think about my phone that's over by the door, not within reach, and I worry if I'm going to have a hard time getting this guy out. I stop and tell him we need to call it a night. He lives and that it, thank God. I text him this morning basically saying that it's not going to work out. In my life, I've only been on 2 bad first dates. One was when I was in high school, so I don't even know that it counts. The other was as an adult. High school bad date because dinner was at McDonald's, even though he knew ahead of time I was a health-required vegetarian. Since we are all over 30 here, you'll probably remember that MCDs didn't have a veggie patty option back in the day. We went to see Shakespeare in Love as our next activity, and he spent the entire second half of the movie whispering to me about Goop's breasts. For those who haven't seen the movie, Goop cross-dresses so that she can be a Shakespearean actor, but she and Will fall head over heels for one another, and there's a scene where he undoes her binder. It's the only nudity in the movie. Went to a coffee shop to close out the night. I was 0 caffeine back then as an attempt to control my ADHD without having to medicate. This particular coffee shop didn't have non-CAF options. While chatting at the coffee shop where I managed to get a tap water, we were discussing our lives, and it turned out we were both auditioning for the same spot on an improv comedy team. He told me that I should withdraw from consideration because a girlfriend does not upstage her boyfriend, and this on a first date. I informed him of all the information necessary to have not made the dietary blunders ahead of time. I cannot speak to the movie decorum blunder that didn't require any special information from me to know not to make. The threat blunder, either. Adult bad date. We went to a speakeasy, though I'm a beer girl, which I had identified ahead of time. The speakeasy didn't serve beer, only fancy cocktails. The bartender decided to mansplain the chemistry of the cocktail to me, a person with a chemistry degree, and as is consistent with the term mansplain, got some key details wrong. My date took umbrage with me gently correcting the bartender, mixologist, so that he might not err in the future. At one point during the evening my phone rang, unplanned. My date said, "Go ahead and take it. I know you little ladies have schemes to pretend to be needed in order to have an excuse to leave if the date is unsafe. You can tell your friend that I'm a perfect gentleman." After concluding the phone call I asked him, "What makes you think that I'd be worried for my safety? What makes you think that of the 2 of us at this table, you're the most dangerous one?" I was curious about his views on gender, but from his face it was clear that this was the wrong question to ask, and he was already putting me in the no category. Reading the room, I went to the bathroom in order to make a polite exit to what was clearly a date that had worked for screening purposes. The soap dispenser in the bathroom was a long, flexible tube filled with white pearlescent soap that the hand washer was meant to milk in order to get any soap for hand washing. This 100% hit me in my sense of humor because it looked all the world like a condom, and giving it a hand job was how one got white liquid to squirt from its tip. Please tell me you are with me on this one. Anyway, I came out of the bathroom and as a parting gesture, shared my observations. He got actually huffy about how lowbrow I could be in such a fine establishment with clearly the most refined of taste. I was upfront about my personality, preferences, views on gender equality, and so on before the date he planned without allowing me any information nor revisions. It was quite clear to me that he was running me through his ideal date scenario, but was clearly slow on the uptake because our pre-date communication ought to have revealed to him that I'd failed to be the demure, proper, cocktail-sipping lass who would never see the penis connection with the soap dispenser and saw all men as big, horribly scary creatures. What makes a date bad? Finding myself in the kind of bizarro world where I want to find a mic and tap it and ask, "Is this thing on?" Because all the key components of the date were items that were discussed ahead of time where my input was completely disregarded. Were they attempts at boundary violations? The person I was on a date simply being a one-trick pony unable to have flexibility and run a different play? I don't know and I don't want to know. Things that were first dates that didn't proceed to second dates include the guy who admitted that he was still living with and caring for his ex-wife because he felt a sense of duty to her, and oh by the way, he was also polyamorous. Translation in his case: "Hi, I'm still married and my wife doesn't know what's up, but I'm hoping you won't attempt to make contact with her, because you are a poly person who doesn't need to meet your metamours this early." I thank him for being upfront with his red flag, and the activities of the date absolutely showed that we were both capable of listening to the other one's preferences. The guy with blessedly unmasked autism, who info-dumped about the Star Wars extended universe for the entire date, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. God help me, I love someone passionate about things, and while I wasn't knowledgeable to follow all of what he had to offer, I was so happy to be audience to his passion, and so happy to meet someone passionate about things. Would have been a second date, too, had he not admitted to carrying around a live grenade as a good luck charm. I did not want to go boom. The guy I met on Amtrak when neither he nor I were traveling to our hometown, yet both he and I shared the same hometown, who shared a name with a Seinfeld character. It was one of those meet cuties, except we just didn't vibe in the way we needed to. The guy who spent the better part of our date spouting extreme right-wing political talking points and championed policies that endorsed white supremacy, yet I was the only white person on our date, and I'm the liberal. You think Dave Chappelle's blind, black KKK guy is a total fiction, but I swear they exist in subtler forms. Because we had mutual friends, I know how his story ends. He married a white woman at a NASCAR event surrounded by Confederate flags. I was shown the wedding photo. The guy who spent the first half of the date telling me how I was his fetish-made flesh and identifying his ex-girlfriend to me. I realized I knew her because there are only so many of us in the area that match as many of my demographics as were his fetish. And then spent the other half of the date trying to connect with my history as a water quality chemist by telling me how he knows science about water too. And what science does he know about water? That water has a memory, and if frozen into a particular ice cube shape, will remember that it was frozen into that shape, and so impart healing properties to someone who drinks it as liquid water after. Phew the woo. I was already a nope about him by the end of the date, but I hit up his ex-girlfriend just to hear her input, and she confirmed all the independent conclusions I'd come to. I really wished I'd figured it out as quickly as you did. It would have saved me a year, were her parting words. The guy who thought the color green could cure syphilis, and told me that he spends an hour a day under a green lamp for his health. Because you have syphilis? I asked. I'm not telling, he responded with a wink. My sexual health says no thank you to that risk. The sadist for whom pairing with a masochist was a non-negotiable. I'm not a masochist. Why this didn't come up before the date, I don't know. I could have saved us both time. But we had other things in common, and I left with someone who would become a few years' worth of friend. The guy who I walked out the door of the date location and into the door of my doctor, also in urgent care, conveniently located in a strip mall with a really good restaurant, because he had extremely advanced strep throat and his fever was off the charts and he was doing a "I'm a man, I don't need healthcare" thing. He was embarrassed about it, and it was he who chose to discontinue dating. Quite a few guys who were recently divorced and had a wife-shaped hole in their life that were rushing to plug up. And then a bunch of perfectly normal blokes besides, where we just didn't vibe. I settled down with a guy I met online, but not through old. It's sort of a meet cute. We both were invited separately to a massive, multiplayer online pub quiz / bar trivia event by separate real-life friends who had attended an earlier iteration of the pub quiz, and both of us almost didn't attend. We didn't interact with one another. It was just that, at the end of the quiz, it was announced by one of the participants that an online escape room was being trialed at a later time and date. Both he and I love a good escape room and a good puzzle hunt. So we both attended that online escape room beta, at which point we did interact. I liked his brain in that he seemed to be my perfect complement. In solving puzzles at the point I would get stumped, he would suddenly become clear and able to see the solution, or vice versa. I decided that was enough to make offers of internet friendship, and he accepted my contact info and then made contact. Though he initially annoyed the ever-living bejesus out of me with his attention to detail, whereas I'm a sufficient-is-passing kind of person, we built a friendship and then ultimately developed feelings for one another. Our first date was grocery shopping together, where once again our brains harmonized, yay vibe, and we both discovered that we liked the look of one another and that webcams and screens did neither of us any favors. We kissed at the end of that date. Now we live together and have a baby on the way. I'd be chatting with a girl on a dating site. We decide to meet for a date. I went. She was there at the prearranged meeting spot. Now, I get that we generally want to look our best in the profile pics on a dating site. But nice clothes, makeup, and appealing angles is one thing. This girl was one of those that looked like a completely different person IRL, and you only saw the similarities to the photos after a few minutes. Okay, not starting off well. It turns out reality her is actually quite frumpy compared to internet her. But that didn't matter because I shit the bed the very first thing I did anyway. I wanted to seem confident, so I strode up to her and with an upbeat tone said, "Hi, you must be Sarah." She just looked at me for several seconds before saying, "It's Emily." I have no idea how I fucked that up. I knew her name was Emily and was not even talking to anybody named Sarah. This was back in the early 2010s and Neil Strauss, The Game, had just entered the public conscience. For the record, I will say I tried reading that book like 3 times to see what all the fuss was about, but always gave up after less than a 1/3 of the book. It simply sucks as a book. Well, Sarah or Emily, or whatever the fuck, had apparently studied the game intently to protect herself from any of its devilries, and despite my profused apologies, she was adamant that I had tried one of the negging strategies from the book. We went for a walk in a park and tried making conversation, and it went badly all the way. We passed a little beer garden type place. Ah, thought I to myself, surely some alcohol can smoothen out the evening for us a bit. I suggest we go in for a beer and she agrees. Time for my next wrong turn. She was making zero effort, and I was too young and dumb to call it quits when I should. Instead I sat there and tried to improve our rapport, but she was making zero effort, and instead I made the classic mistake of drinking more to try and make her more interesting. So after a bit I am too drunk to handle anything smoothly, and certainly way more drunk than she was. Time for my fuck-up finale. In a last-ditch effort to try and make her interesting, I suggest that perhaps we go back to my place and smoke some pot. She squinted her eyes at me in anger and said her brother was an addict, and it all started because he liked weed. At this point my senses finally caught up to me, and I said, "Well, I think we can both agree this has been a shit evening for the both of us. How about we call it a night and go our separate ways?" She just said, "Yeah." We paid and walked out without even saying goodbye to each other. Another story for you here. Met a girl at a bar and had some fun dancing and talking with her, so we exchanged numbers and made plans to meet up the following Friday to have a coffee date. I figured it would be nice and quiet, and we could really talk and get to know one another. The morning after meeting, I woke up to 7 texts from her ranging from like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. when I woke up. I was a university student who didn't have class that day, so I'm naturally sleeping in. Anyway, she would text me like every 15 minutes asking, "What are you doing?" Or some variation of it. I'd say studying, or whatever, and she would say, "I'll bug you later." Sounds good, right? Let me study and do my thing, and we'll talk later. Well, sure enough, later is 15 minutes later, and we do the same old song and dance. Wednesday rolls around, and I stay after class to do a group project with my classmates. In the group are 2 ladies and 1 other dude with me for a total of 4. That, "What are you doing?" Text and said, "Doing a group project." She said, "Send me a pic." And me being naive and dumb did it. She went on a rant that would rival a parent yelling at their kid. She said, "You are not to hang out with other women without me present. Do you understand? I don't care if it's for school or for social reasons. You are not to be out with other women without me there." When I read that, I considered just telling her that I was done and not going on the date. I figured I'd made a commitment, so I followed through on the date, and it was the biggest joke. As we sat down, I asked her what was up with that rant from Wednesday. She said, "What rant?" And I showed her the texts about her going off on me about being with other girls. For school. And she basically said I didn't say that. I said, "Dude, your texts are right here." giving her a chance to retract that statement. But she doubled down and said, "I didn't say that." I got up, said good luck, and left. She tried following me out to my car and blocking me from getting in the car, and I said, "Move, or I'm calling the police." She refused to move, so I got out my phone and walked back into the coffee shop. She then got in her car and left, and I left and figured that was the end of it. No, it wasn't. The funny thing is, she insisted on picking me up, but I kept declining and said I'd drive myself. Odds are she knew where I lived already because she was super creepy and weird, but I wasn't going to volunteer that information. I drove mostly so I wouldn't have her pick me up and to also be able to leave when I wanted to. This didn't happen during the date, but after our one and only date. This happened almost 15 years ago. I was working abroad at the time, and I met an incredibly aesthetically pleasing lady at a coffee shop and absolutely had to chat her up. We exchanged numbers, and we went out for drinks later that week. While the date went off all right, I felt like something wasn't quite right, so I told her at the end of the night that I had a great time, but I didn't think we had much in common. She seemed okay with this fact, thanked me for my honesty, and we parted ways with a hug. A couple days later, I get a text as I'm leaving the office from her asking if I can meet up because she needed to talk to someone. I'm not going to be jerk and say no, especially since she sounded desperate, so I told her to meet me at the coffee shop where we first met. She showed up with a suitcase, looking incredibly disheveled and obviously having recently cried. We sat down to start talking, and she started telling me how she was in a bad place, got involved with a lot of hard drugs, was turning tricks on the street to fund said drugs, and just got kicked out by her mom. While I'm trying to absorb the deluge and not choke on my coffee, she asked if she could stay with me. Nope. I told her I wasn't comfortable with the idea since we didn't know each other, and asked if she had anyone else to turn to, which led to more crying. We were starting to cause a scene, so I then offered to get a room for her at one of the local hotels, using my travel points, but she didn't have to know, so that she could at least have a place for the night while she sorted things out. She accepted on the condition that I at least stay a while with her for comfort. We check in, head to the room, and sit down to start talking some more. I then realize that it's relatively late and I have to get up early for work, so I make these facts known. She breaks down some more, which leaves me conflicted to the point that I reluctantly stay, and I tell myself that I have a pretty good excuse for my boss in the morning. A few more hours later, I really need to get to sleep, so I tell her that I'm just going to sleep in the one bed, so I can get some rest before my day starts, and she can have the other bed to herself. She goes to start getting ready for bed, and I fall fast asleep. I wake up roughly 30 minutes later, probably around 4 a.m.-ish. Incredibly groggy, but something is definitely not right. I'm still trying to focus because I slept in my contacts, so my eyes are taking a minute to adjust. There's an arm draped around me. Why do I feel wet and sticky? Then I notice all the red. She cut herself and crawled into bed with me. Instant panic mode. It took everything I had to swallow my heart a couple times as it desperately attempted to escape. I called down to the front desk asking where the nearest hospital was. No time to explain. I'll pay for the room, etc. I don't remember carrying her out to the car, wrapped in the drenched bedsheets, nor do I remember the drive to the hospital. I only remember carrying her through the front door and yelling for help. The staff rushed over and took her away, and I was immediately sat with 2 officers and a nurse, doctor, who started asking me a lot of questions. I answered as honestly as I could, but noticed my peripheral was starting to turn black, then fainted. I eventually came to, and so did the girl. Thankfully, she corroborated my side of the story and that there was no foul play. I don't want to know what would have happened otherwise considering I was a foreign national on a work visa. I've avoided talking to girls in coffee shops since. So I was in a relationship with my ex, Alexis, about 5 years ago. I fell for her because of her snarky attitude, intelligence, and kindness. At least, the person she was back then. We clicked instantly, bonding over shared jokes, and I felt like we had something special. But even early on, there were red flags. Alexis lied about small things, often to keep to herself, and avoided asking for help, even when it would have benefited her. For example, she refused my offer to help with social studies, claiming her grandparents would suspect something, even though it was clear she didn't know how Canadian social studies worked. Another red flag was her emotional distance. She would shut me out during hard times, leaving me confused about where I stood. She had insecurities that she occasionally acknowledged, like how being around a bad crowd in the US had negatively influenced her, but she rarely let me help her with anything meaningful. By the end of our relationship, her dishonesty and emotional unavailability had become patterns that left me feeling deeply unsettled. The relationship eventually ended, leaving me confused and without closure. After the breakup, Alexis became distant and vindictive, emotionally shutting me out and making it clear that the person I had loved had changed. After the breakup, I was desperate for closure. A mutual friend, Taylor, claimed she was the one who got us together in the first place, which wasn't true, and told me she could get Alexis and me back together for a price. Desperate to reconcile, I ended up spending over $300 on her promises. For 8 weeks, I'd ask for updates every couple of weeks, but instead of answers, I got excuses, lies, or outright yelling. During this time, I ran into Alexis on Omegle by complete chance. She confirmed personal details only she could know, her name, birthday, and personal things about our relationship, and even told me she loved me. I thought this was the beginning of us reconnecting. She said she wanted to meet me after school, but she never showed up. I was crushed. Later, she denied that the Omegle interaction had ever happened, which left me feeling like I was crazy. Even Jordan, her brother, believed it was her at first, and he tried to mediate by putting us on a Discord call. During that call, I rambled a lot, and it wasn't healthy. It was clear I was spiraling from all the mixed signals and unresolved feelings. After the Omegle encounter, things took a darker turn. Taylor started spreading rumors that I was dangerously obsessed with Alexis, saying I'd go to her house to hurt her. These rumors reached Alexis, and despite knowing the truth, she chose not to disprove them. Her silence allowed the lies to spread throughout the school, leading to devastating consequences. I lost my friends, my reputation, and even became a target. I was physically jumped because of the rumors. Looking back, this was one of the most painful parts of the entire experience. Alexis's inaction felt like a betrayal, compounding the emotional toll of the breakup and the confusion from Omegle. Then, Alexis announced she was moving back to the US. Despite everything, we were somehow still on friendly terms. Before she left, she invited me, Taylor, and my best friend to a water park to spend the day together. At the water park, we all laughed and had fun, but her behavior toward me stood out. While she took everyone else aside for 5 minutes to say her goodbyes, she pulled me aside for an hour. During that time, she was very touchy-feely, constantly finding excuses to make contact with me, whether in the hot tub or by brushing against me. She kept staring at my chest and eyes, flirting with me the entire time. It wasn't just a goodbye, it felt like she still had feelings for me. I left the water park thinking there was a real chance she wanted to get back together. After she left, we kept in touch through the group chat we shared with Taylor and my best friend. Conversations in the group chat were warm and friendly, but whenever I tried to talk to her one-on-one in direct messages, the tone shifted dramatically. She was cold and distant in DMs, and it became clear that the warmth in the group chat was performative. This went on for a while, leaving me emotionally confused and frustrated. Eventually, I realized what was happening. Alexis was keeping me on a hook, tucked away as a plan B. She was ensuring I stayed close enough to her emotionally in case she needed me in the future. When I confronted her about it, she denied everything, but by then it didn't matter. I knew the truth. After I cut contact with Alexis entirely, Jordan started asking if I was talking to her again, thinking he heard my voice in her room. It turned out Alexis was dating a guy who looked and sounded like me, but he didn't have my personality. Their relationship was short-lived, and she dumped him soon after. From there, she bounced between dating various guys and girls, none lasting longer than a month. In June 2024, I noticed Alexis appearing in my Facebook friend suggestions. This started 1 to 2 weeks after her breakup with Ryan, her most recent ex-boyfriend. Initially, Alexis was the only one searching for me, but 3 weeks ago, her best friend Harper also began appearing in my suggestions, likely collaborating with Alexis. 2 days ago, I met Ryan on a Discord server created by Jordan for Minecraft. As we talked, we realized we were eerily similar in personality, and he turned out to be Alexis's most recent ex-boyfriend. Ryan confirmed that Alexis had been keeping me as a plan B all those years ago, something I had always suspected. He also shared that Alexis's manipulative behaviors, dishonesty, and emotional unavailability had intensified over the years. During their 6-month relationship, she became fixated on social media, constantly asking Ryan to keep up her Snapchat streaks instead of focusing on meaningful communication. Ryan also shared that Alexis became angry when he moved on quickly and didn't react the same way I had. It became clear that she thrives on having emotional control over people and was upset when Ryan didn't give her the same power she once had over me. Since then, Ryan and I have bonded over our shared experiences with Alexis. We've used humor to cope, joking about being soulmates, and playfully acting overly affectionate in the Minecraft server to annoy her. Eventually, Alexis saw us talking and left the Discord server entirely. I think it's hilarious that she left after realizing she'd been caught. It feels validating, but at the same time, it reminds me of wounds I've carried for years. These wounds never truly healed. I just got used to them being open. However, with everything that's happened recently, I feel like they're finally starting to close. Even after all this, Alexis still lingers in my thoughts. It's not that I want her back as she is now, but I feel drawn to her in a way I can't fully explain, as if I might have a further purpose in her life. My faith has helped me immensely in processing these feelings. I've prayed for Alexis, for her to find peace and someone who loves her as much as I did, but only if she's willing to change for the better. I've also prayed for clarity and strength, knowing that if she hasn't changed, I wouldn't take her back. I've recently been diagnosed with PTSD, which explains a lot about why I've struggled with these lingering emotions for so long. Honestly, I don't know what it's like not to have it. I really wanted to make a good impression on my first attempt at Tinder. His name was Jake, the guy I finally matched with. Jake seemed nice, looked fairly tall, funny, and had this rugged outdoorsy charm and a solid bio. Tick tick tick. I mean, come on. He was hot, he loved tacos, and he wasn't afraid to meet in person. That's a rare find in the Tinder jungle. We messaged back and forth for a few days, and it was effortless. His sense of humor matched mine perfectly. He'd send me cheeky jokes, and I'd fire back with my own, and soon enough, we were beginning to plan our first date. He suggested a trendy little bar downtown, the kind of place that serves craft cocktails with names like Smoky Pineapple Dream and Cinnamon Apocalypse. I was nervous, of course. First dates always make me nervous. But I had butterflies in the good way, the kind that make you want to shave your legs even though you're definitely not planning on letting anyone touch them that evening. Or so I thought. The night of the date, I took my time getting ready. I put on my favorite little black dress, the one that hugs my curves in all the right places but doesn't scream, "I'm trying too hard." I paired it with some killer heels and a swipe of red lipstick for that effortlessly sexy vibe. But here's where things started to go wrong, although I didn't realize it at the time. About an hour before I left, I decided to grab a quick snack. I hadn't eaten all day because I was too busy obsessing over what to wear and whether or not Jake would think I was funny in person. So I raided my fridge and found some leftover takeout from the night before, specifically a spicy chicken curry. It was delicious, like really delicious. But about 20 minutes later, I started to feel this strange, ominous gurgling in my stomach. Don't overthink it, I told myself. It's just nerves. Spoiler alert, it was not just nerves. I arrived at the bar a few minutes early, which is rare for me, because I'm usually the queen of fashionably late. Jake was already there, sitting at the bar with a drink in hand, and when he turned to smile at me, I swear my knees almost gave out. He was even better looking in person, broad shoulders, strong jawline, the kind of guy who could probably make a flannel shirt look like high fashion. "Hey you," he said, standing up to hug me. His cologne smelled amazing, and I could already feel my cheeks flushing. We grabbed a table, and the conversation flowed as easily as the cocktails. Jake was charming, witty, and had this way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the only girl in the room. I was laughing so much my cheeks hurt, and I was already mentally planning our second date. But then, about 30 minutes in, my stomach betrayed me. It started with a small cramp, just a little twinge that I tried to ignore. But then it got worse, and worse, until finally, I knew I had to excuse myself. I'll be right back," I said, standing up so quickly that I almost knocked over my drink. Jake looked a little surprised but smiled and said, "Sure, take your time." I bolted to the bathroom, my heels clacking against the tile floor, and locked myself in a stall. The spicy chicken curry had chosen violence. I'll spare you the graphic details, but let's just say it was a situation. I was in there for what felt like an eternity, frantically Googling things like how to stop stomach cramps immediately, and can you die from embarrassing yourself on a first date? When I finally felt stable enough to return to the table, I took a deep breath, plastered on a smile, and walked back out like nothing had happened. "Everything okay?" Jake asked when I sat down. "Yeah, totally fine." I lied, trying not to look like I had just fought a war in the bathroom. We picked up where we left off, and for a while things were good again. But then, about 10 minutes later, the cramps came back with a vengeance. "Oh, I need to use the restroom again," I said, trying to sound casual. Jake raised an eyebrow but nodded. "All right, no problem." Round 2 in the bathroom was even worse than the first. At this point, I was sweating, my makeup was smudged, and I was starting to seriously regret every life choice that had led me to this moment. When I finally emerged, Jake was standing near the bar, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, his tone more concerned this time. Yeah, I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just too many cocktails, I guess." He gave me a small smile, but didn't look convinced. The next hour was a blur of me trying to act normal, while secretly battling the urge to sprint to the bathroom every 5 minutes. I kept excusing myself, and Jake was clearly starting to notice. "Wow, you must really love the bathrooms here," he joked after my 4th trip. I tried to laugh it off, but I could feel my face turning bright red. The final straw came when I was halfway through telling him a story about my dog, and another cramp hit me like a freight train. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I have to go again," I blurted out, practically running toward the bathroom without waiting for his response. This time, as I sat in the stall, I seriously considered just staying there forever. Maybe I could text Jake and tell him I'd been abducted by aliens. Or maybe I could fake my own death and start a new life in a different city. But then something even worse happened. There was a knock on the bathroom door. Claire?" It was Jake. I wanted to die. "Yeah," I croaked, my voice barely audible. "Are you okay? You've been in there a while." "I'm fine," I squeaked. "Just, I'm fixing my makeup." "Oh, okay," he said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. When I finally emerged, Jake was standing outside, looking both concerned and amused. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, tilting his head. I nodded furiously, trying to act like I wasn't about to collapse. "Totally fine. Just, girl stuff." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push it. We sat back down, and I prayed to every god I could think of that my stomach would chill out for the rest of the night. But then Jake leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, teasing tone. He said, smirking, "if you wanted to play hard to get, you didn't have to keep running off." I let out a nervous laugh, trying to ignore the way his proximity made my heart race. "Oh, you caught me," I said, forcing a grin. "This was all part of my master plan." He chuckled, his eyes sparkling. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're worth the wait." Despite everything, the night ended on a surprisingly good note. We walked out of the bar together, and he offered to call me a cab. "You sure you're okay to get home?" he asked, his hand brushing against mine. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, my cheeks heating up. He paused, then smiled. "All right, but next time, I'm picking the restaurant. Something a little less adventurous." I laughed despite myself. "Deal." As I climbed into the cab, I couldn't help but feel a tiny spark of hope. Maybe I hadn't completely ruined things after all. But as soon as I got home, my stomach reminded me who was really in charge. Let's just say I'll never eat spicy chicken curry before a date again. I want to tell my story after a series of crappy relationships/dating ventures. I'm 27, been in a few relationships, but none of them have lasted long enough to be considered long-term. I've been love-bombed, pressured/coerced into bed, ghosted, and outright disrespected by almost every guy I've been with. This is a long one, but trust me, it's a must-read. I've heard that the guys I pick are usually a reflection of how I view myself, and yes, I agree, but to a certain extent. Most of the guys I've been with have faked being a good guy up until we both got comfortable. Then they started showing their true colors. I used to love myself when I was single. I wouldn't even seek out a relationship because I was so happy by myself. Somehow I'd always get sucked into the dating world by a guy that was charming enough to catch my attention. I think after so many failed attempts at dating and trying to form a healthy relationship, I've began to hate myself. I've started thinking, what is it about me that makes it so hard for men to stay with me? Because of that, I've taken lots of time to rebuild myself and look deep into my own flaws to see what I did wrong in past relationships and try to fix it. In one of those relationships, I was taking it too serious, and he so obviously wasn't. In the next relationship, I was emotionally unavailable for the majority of it BC. I was going through grief. In the next one, I was ready for a healthy relationship, and he made it seem like he was too by love bombing me. I fell for it, BC. I had never felt so loved. Then I woke up to a phone call saying he wasn't used to being loved the way I loved him, and ghosted. I was devastated. I swore off dating for a year and a half after that. That happened in August 23rd. I tried healing a lot of childhood trauma because I realized it was directly tied to the type of men I picked. It worked. I healed myself in ways I didn't think I could heal. Fast forward to now. I've decided that I'm open to dating again. I'm not actively seeking it out, but if it finds me, I'm open to seeing where things go. The only difference now is that I only want to date intentionally. I don't want to give myself to someone that I'm not sure is going to last long. I have a lot of love to give, so I'm not going to give it out to just anyone anymore. Over the past month or so, I've been asked on 2 dates, and while both went well, at the end they expressed that they were only looking for something more along the lines of friends with benefits. I immediately said no thanks, it's not for me, and left it at that. Then one night as I was getting home, I got a call from an unknown number. I usually don't answer unknown numbers, but this time I was waiting for a call from a family friend that was buying a painting from me, so I assumed it was them. I answered, and the first thing that came from their mouth was, "Am I a crappy person?" I didn't recognize the voice at first, so I said, "Who's this?" And he said, "You know who it is." In that moment I realized that I did in fact know who it was. It was the guy that ghosted me after love bombing me for months, and getting me to fall so deeply in love with him. I guess you could say he was my first love. I froze and stayed quiet as he rambled on about how he knows he was shitty for ghosting me. He went on, then started saying how he realized he was seeking the ways I loved him in every woman he was with since, and none of them would show him that same love, so he'd be left with thoughts of me. I was shocked, to say the least. I had to keep reminding myself that this was the man that love bombed me, and that's probably what he was trying to do again. The more he talked, the more I thought I'd fall for it. The more I realized how easy it was to talk to him for hours and hours with no awkward silence. How I loved when he'd sing to me, even though he didn't have the best singing voice. How he'd send me the songs with lyrics that fit our situation so perfectly. I found myself falling into his trap once again. We ended up talking on the phone for 7 hours. I was so disappointed in myself for it, and he knew it. He kept saying things like, "I'm sure you're hating how easy it is to talk to me. Trust me, I don't get it either." I was blinded once again. His words struck something in me, and for some reason, in the moment I believed him. Then we ended the phone call. As soon as we did, I had a heavy pit in my stomach. I felt this indescribable feeling. After sleeping on it, I woke up to a phone call from him. Just like he used to. He called me on the way to work just to say good morning. We hung up after saying good morning, and I knew exactly what that pit was in my stomach. The feeling of impending doom. Days passed, and every day, I realized that when he ghosted me, he had done damage to me that can't be reversed by triggering the one thing I thought I had mostly healed in that year and a half since we last talked. He triggered my abandonment issues, and talking to him again was making those issues come back up. I was starting to wonder if any of what he said was true. I was wondering when he'd ghost me again, guessing it'd be in a few days to a week. Then I began thinking, what if I just leave him before he leaves me? Surely it'd be less painful this time. So that's what I did. I stopped replying, and he stopped replying too. Then I had a sense of relief. Then a sense of sadness. Then a sense of what could have been. A few days later, I woke up to a long text from him, saying how he wanted to try things out with me one last time. He feels like he's the odd man out in his friend group. BC. They are settling down and getting married to the women they've been with for a long time. He said he wants to settle down with a woman that will be a good wife to him, and he thinks that's what I would give him. What he doesn't get is, as I'm reading his words, I'm thinking, so he wants to settle for me. Just BC. I've shown him in the past that I'd do wifely things for him. And yes, maybe I'm wrong for thinking this way, but the way he worded it made me think of it that way. My future husband will want me, not just for the wifely things I'd do for him, but for other things too. He'd want me for my wits, my intelligence, and my thought process. He'd want me for the little habits I have, and the little things I appreciate. He'd want me for the platonic things too. BC. I believe a relationship has to also be a companionship as well, and not everything has to be romantic or sexual. The guy texting me the wifely things he wants from me, such as cleaning, cooking, and giving him love in a physical touch sort of way, is not my future husband. He doesn't truly see me for who I am. For that reason, I tell him I'm not the one he will settle down with, and I'm sure as hell not going to be the one he's going to settle for. And as if the universe couldn't have screamed it any louder for me to hear, I have this overwhelming sense of relief, and the pit of impending doom in my stomach has gone away. I laughed. Trust me, universe, I know. That's why I'm back at square one, trying to heal yet another part of me, so I can become the best version of myself, not only for myself, but for my future husband. My future partner. So future partner, if you're somehow reading this, whether it's in the future or right now, I hope you know how much work I'm putting into myself for you and me. I hope we meet soon. I met this guy on Hinge, and we hit it off so quick, and everything was going so good. We spoke for months and would call and message 24/7. He always had a problem with following and feeling the need to entertain girls, which was an issue for me, and I would bring it up a lot as a concern. He would go mad on me and tell me that they're just colleagues and that I was getting mad for no reason. Anyway, I started looking into these people, and they were in all different countries. So when I asked what his job is for them to be around the world, and he told me he worked in high tech at Google, I forgot the exact role. 3 months go by, and we are still great. He then asks me to be his girlfriend through a cute Spotify album. And being crazy and delusional, I said yes so soon. We hadn't even met. This followed with him telling me he loves me for the first time a couple days after. After this honeymoon stage, he had stopped being as loving, wouldn't let me go out to certain places, and wanted to know every single one of my movements. This man also wanted marriage. He is Muslim. Anyway, he would get on and off with me, and his mood would always affect mine, which was most of the time bad, constantly making me feel worthless. Anyway, I stayed with him. Then he disappears. Without reasoning, all his accounts disappeared. And I was left clueless and crying and whatever. This went on for a week. All his accounts were gone and untraceable. He then comes back onto his accounts after a week. I message asking pretty much WTF. And he claimed that I was talking to other men at the beginning of the relationship. I can confirm this did not happen. So I called him and spent hours reassuring him that it never happened. But he acts all stubborn about it and says he doesn't believe me. Eventually, after time, things get better. Things were good with us again, but he started to drift away and claimed that he was just really busy with work and everything else. So when I brought it up, he immediately made it out to be my problem and fault and argued with me, saying that I was asking for too much just from wanting to talk to him. He would cause arguments all the time if I brought up even one thing that bothered me. Anyways, after time, he unfollows the girls that I asked and removes his socials from his TikTok bio because I said that he doesn't need his Snapchat there because he doesn't need to snap other girls. This is great, but it lasted about a week before he was back to it again. He had followed a girl in Australia, which I wasn't comfortable with, but said she is a colleague. However, she had just finished high school, so would not work for Google. He was just full of lies. Even his sisters would compliment and ask about me to him, and I began to learn Arabic for him so that I could talk with his mom. We had not met at this point yet, as he said that we can meet in the new year due to his lack of holiday at work. I said fine and prepared for when I did see him, saving money to get my hair done, nails done ECT. January is here, and there is no sign of him making any plans whatsoever, and when I ask about it, he shuts me down. So I just think whatever and wait. He then continues to follow girls, and when I ask why, it turns into a big argument, and he says that I'm too much for him, and that he needed space. While I'm emotional and heartbroken, I search though his TikTok following with another account I have, specifically for this. And I get recommended a profile with him on it. This profile has a different name, different Snapchat, different Instagram, different location, and loads of girls in his following. He had a double life and another girlfriend. So despite us being on a break, I called him a lot, and he didn't pick up, so I sent him voice notes telling him that I knew about these accounts and the lies. This man also didn't work at Google, he worked at Lidl, and he didn't even live where he said he did. He listened to the voice notes and then blocked me, as he had been caught. This was 8 months of a relationship lie. The craziest part is that I've seen a picture of his ID with the name I thought was his, but I don't even know his real name or who he really is. I'm in the local BDSM community, and I knew this girl from various events and stuff, and asked her if she might want to go out, with the implication that we would be feeling each other out for the prospect of play, as in BDSM play, and hooking up. She was smoking hot, and seemed nice, and we got along well enough at events, so it seemed promising. When I invited her out to eat, I did what I usually do, and invited her to a place I know that's fairly low-key and public. You know, no pressure, quiet enough to chat without being overheard, but public enough that she'll feel safe. This place is also connected to a food court which, I know, not super classy, but that way people have options if they're picky eaters or have a restricted diet. Well, right before we're about to eat, She calls me up and asks if we can eat somewhere else, a Chinese place she likes. I'm caught a bit off guard, but I go with it. We get there, and the entire time she's talking about herself, and it's a very odd talk. She's going on at length about how she wants a sugar daddy, someone who will just give her money and let her do her thing, and she can live a life of luxury without having to work. Yeah, that's not me. But good luck to you on that front, girl. But hey, we're both poly/open. So just because she wants to pursue her dream of some schmuck who will be her golden goose doesn't mean she and I can't still have fun in the meantime, I suppose. Still, the conversation never does get to us. Here, I figured that she and I would be talking about what she's looking for in terms of play. Maybe we could start negotiation, a BDSM term, outlining expectations and rules for play, or at least getting a feel for each other and whether or not we want to proceed. But she's not really asking me anything, and she isn't telling me anything about herself other than this odd kick she's on about sugar daddies. So by the end of the meal, I'm kind of perplexed at the direction things are going, and wondering just when we're going to be talking about, us. And it's here that she asks if we can go to the mall together. Okay, kinda odd. I make a mental note that I will not be spending 1 cent on this girl in the mall. Not because I'm opposed to spending money on a girl, but because she just went on a long rant about wanting a sugar daddy, and I don't want her to get the notion in her head that that's me. We get there, and are joined by another guy who she invited along with us, and that's when I really check out. It's one thing for me to be okay with her seeing other guys while she's seeing me, but it's another thing entirely for her to be inviting them along when we're essentially on our first date. That's just fucking weird. She goes into a clothing store to try on clothes, and me and this other guy are sitting outside the fitting room, and I'm looking for the exit. Only reason I didn't bail immediately was because I'm still going to be seeing this girl regularly at events and didn't want to be rude. As soon as she comes out, I tell her I need to go, and that was the end of that. I'm not upset with that other guy, but I sure as hell hope he had the good sense to get the hell out of there not long after I did. That shit was crazy. It all started with a swipe on Tinder. His name was Ryan. There was nothing remarkable about his profile, borderline boring, if I'm being honest. A couple of photos of him hiking, one of him holding a dog, which I later learned wasn't even his, and a bio that read something like, just a laid-back guy looking for someone who'll explore the city with him. Family is everything. I didn't have my heart set on anything specific, but after a number of matches who had nothing interesting to offer to a conversation, or who appeared to have been on more than one boys' trip to Las Vegas, Ryan seemed reliable, normal, and normal had sounded pretty good to me. We started chatting. He was courteous, perhaps a bit too much so, but I felt he was simply nervous. He asked about my job, my favorite bands, whether I was more beach or mountains. He seemed sincerely curious to learn more about me, which I found refreshing. What struck me was how many times he mentioned his family. He'd just drop it in conversation, sort of, "Oh, you enjoy cooking? My mom makes the best lasagna, you would love it." Or, "I grew up with 2 sisters, but my mom has always been the most important woman in my life." Sweet, right? At least, that was my first inclination. After messaging for about a week, he asked me out for drinks. I wasn't sure whether I was feeling any sparks, but I thought, why not? He seemed perfectly nice, and I was sick of wasting Friday nights scrolling through Netflix and dozing off on the couch. So I said yes. The bar he chose was adorable, dark, a little fancy, but not too cool. I arrived early and took a booth toward the back. I was so relieved to see that Ryan looked like his pictures when he walked in. Tall, clean-cut, wholesome in a way that made me picture someone you'd take home to meet your parents. He smiled at me, and I smiled back. So far, so good. We went through the niceties. How was your day? How was the drive? You look great, and ordered drinks. He was a little nervous, and that was okay. First dates are awkward. I figured all it needed was a warm-up. Then he started talking, and talking, and talking. Originally, there was nothing out of the ordinary. He told me about his job. He worked in finance, something about spreadsheets and portfolios that I pretended to understand. Next, he started to speak about his family, specifically his mom. "She's my rock," he said, his eyes brightening. "Oh, I really don't know what I would do without her. You're the most incredible woman I've ever known." "That's nice," I said, honestly believing it was sweet. "It sounds like you're pretty close." "Oh, we are," he said, with the conspiratorial lean of someone about to impart a secret. "She's my best friend. I call her every day. Sometimes twice a day. She understands me, you know." I nodded, fighting to keep my smile from cracking. It was a bit intense, but I thought he was just one of those guys who's really family-oriented. Nothing wrong with that, except he didn't stop. The more he drank, the more he spoke of her. How she'd brought him and his sisters up alone after his father had left. How she'd worked 3 jobs to ensure they were never without. How she continues to send him care packages. Never mind that he's 34 and lives under 10 miles away from her. It's not only the big stuff, he said, swirling his whiskey and staring into the glass as though it contained the meaning of life. It's the small things she does too. Like just last week, I was saying I'm considering a new pair of running shoes, and the next day, she's just at my place, with a pair. My exact size. Can you believe that? Well, that's considerate, I said, my voice quivering for the first time. I didn't know what to say. Was this normal? Maybe he was simply nervous and was falling back on something benign to make small talk, but I couldn't get past the sense that there was more to it. Thoughtful, he said again, laughing a little too heartily. No, thoughtful is when somebody remembers your birthday. This is love. This is what it is like to be spiritually connected to someone on a soul-deep level. He glanced at me, his eyes suddenly serious. You don't meet somebody like that every day, I nodded, and I tried to change the subject. So, you said you like hiking? Any good trails around here? Oh no, absolutely, he said, waving my effort aside as though it were trifling. My mom and I are obsessed with hiking. Actually, she's in better shape than I am. Can you believe that? She's 62, and she still smokes me on most trails. It's incredible. She's incredible. By then I could practically feel the bartender's eyes on us from across the room, wondering why I looked as if I were mapping an escape route. I grinned through it, hoping he'd run out of things to say about her soon. But he didn't. For the next hour, he opened up about everything. How she always knew what to say, how she laughed the best laugh, how nobody could make lasagna like she could. He even explained how she'd decorated his apartment, from the color of his bedsheets on up. She has an eye for that sort of thing, he added proudly. I mean, she chose my toothbrush holder. My toothbrush holder. Who else would even think of something like that? I attempted to change the subject again, but he wasn't having it. All roads led back to her. By the time the waiter brought the check, I was ready to pretend there was a family emergency, just so I could get out of there. Then he leaned forward, his face suddenly insistent. He said in a lowered voice, I think she'd really like you. Oh, I said, nervous laughter escaping me. That's great. No, I mean it, he said, looking into my eyes. You have this kind of warmth about you. Like her. It's rare. She's going to love you. He said it in the way that turned my stomach. Not she'd love me. She's going to love me. Like it was inevitable. Like it was already decided. I snatched my coat and made some excuse about rising early for work, and he insisted on walking me to my car. I didn't have the heart to tell him no, so I let him, even though all of my instincts were yelling at me to run. As we arrived at my car, he stopped and turned to face me. I really enjoyed myself tonight, he said, smiling in a way that did not touch his eyes. I think we really clicked. Yeah, I said, struggling with my keys. Thanks for the drink. I'll text you tomorrow, he said, moving closer. Perhaps we can do dinner next time. My mother prepares this wonderful roast chicken. You'd love it. I stopped in my tracks, my hand resting on the door handle. Dinner with your mom? Of course, he replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She has to meet you. I mean, if this is going to lead anywhere, she has to give the green light. I didn't even respond. I murmured the quickest of goodnights, and climbed into my car and locked the doors as soon as they were closed. As I drove out of the parking lot, I looked back in my rearview mirror. Ryan was still watching me drive away. His face was level, inscrutable, but his eyes were pinned to my car, following me until I rounded the corner and vanished. I blocked him as soon as I got home.